And I did my research on Koreh, וכיף, which means read and high five, exploring routine and adaptive expertise. So when I went to Brandeis undergrad, I took a teaching reading class, and I was taught about this routine, which was high-fiving sight words, that you put on the door of your classroom with a hand on a poster and then a sentence or a word on the bottom. And when I did my student teaching this year, I absolutely loved this idea, and I went up to my mentor teacher and I asked her if we could implement a similar routine but in Hebrew in my classroom, and she said yes, so we did. So I taught at the Solomon Schechter Day School of Greater Boston in Newton, and we had 14 students, and I was in first grade in a Hebrew class, so I didn't have sight words on the door. I had sentences in Hebrew, and they were sentences that had to do with colors, or the weather, or clothing, and sometimes they even had my students' names in them, and they always got really excited when their names were on the door. So because I had 14 students, I always had a little bit of trouble keeping track of who was participating in the routine. So I decided to do research because I wanted to make sure that my students were actually participating, and I wanted to know how they were interacting with this routine. And I also wanted to make sure it was a worthwhile routine for them to participate in and for me to keep in my classroom. So the first question I asked myself was, what was the purpose of my Koreh וכיף routine? And I realized that it had more than one purpose. Its first purpose was of a chimum. It was a warm-up for my students. As they walked in the door, it kind of switched their brains from English to Hebrew. And sometimes there were sentences like this one, Ani noel magafayim, on the door. That means, I wear boots. So it was using words that they already knew in Hebrew to kind of warm them up. And it was also a chizuk, which means a review, or something that strengthened vocabulary they already knew, like Ani ochelet chasa, I eat lettuce, strengthening words like verbs, ochelet, that I wanted them to have mastery over. And it was also a chasifa. It served as exposure to concepts in Hebrew that I wanted them to get an idea of. So this sentence, Moshe batheva b'mayim, Moses in the basket on the water, was something they had heard about in English, but they hadn't really seen or experienced in Hebrew before. Or, like one of my students said on a survey where I asked them, what do you think the purpose is? They wrote, so you can learn new Hebrew words and because it's fun for you to do. So then I went and moved on to my questions about participation. What does it look like when my students participate, and how often do they participate? And in order to answer these questions, I had to collect some data. So I took videos of my students participating on Mondays and Tuesdays, because Mondays was when I put up a new sentence at the beginning of every week. And I took field notes on the days when I didn't manage to set up my video camera in time to catch all of them running into the room. And I also took a survey, like I said, to ask them what they thought the purpose was, and also if they participated, because I asked them to self-assess their participation, and also if they thought it was fun or boring, if they liked participating or not. And I did this from the beginning of March to the end of April. So I'm going to show you a video of what it looks like when my students participate, and I want you to pay attention to the variety of ways my students participate so you can get an idea of why I had to take these videos and why I couldn't just watch them come in the classroom and figure out if my students were participating and what it looked like. So just bear with me for a second while I switch screens. And there we go. If we have time to. Oh, so go back to your locker and look. Oh. Okay, what's it now? I don't think I So as you can see, there are a ton of different ways in which my students interact with this routine. Some of them just kind of walked past, gave it a high five, just kept on going. Some of them took their time to really sound out and read every single word. Some of them started to read, didn't finish a sentence, started to read, asked if they could do something else, then came back. One of my students even started to read that sentence, Ani lo veshet gufiaki cham, which I'm sorry I forgot to translate, means I'm wearing a tank top because it's hot outside, because we were working on that he word, on the phrase because. And he said, Ani lo veshet, lovesh, because loveshet is in the feminine form, and he's the boy, so he was using what he knew about Hebrew to change that word, to make it masculine and make it more applicable to himself. So, after I had all these videos, I looked at all of them again, wrote down every single name of the student who participated, wrote down how they interacted with the sign, and then coded for all of the most common ways, and I ended up with 4 of the most common interactions. And like I said, it allowed me to see how the students really participated in the routine and what they did. And I saw that the 4 most common ways in which they participated in the routine were they either read it aloud and high-fived, they read it to themselves and high-fived the routine, or if they weren't really reading the sign, what I didn't consider actually participating, they high-fived without reading the sign, or if they didn't high-five and didn't read the sign. And if they did one of the latter two, sometimes the teacher would see them and ask them to go back and read it again. But the kids were actually participating, they were actually reading the sign. So unlike what I had previously thought, I found that 11 out of my 14 students were participating in the routine 60 to 100% of the times. I collected data from the beginning of March to the end of April. So now that I knew that my kids were actually participating, I had to take a step back and say, why are they interacting in the routine in this way? So I turned to literature about routines, and I found literature by a cognitive scientist named Gio Hatanu, and he developed this concept of routine and adaptive expertise, which provided me with a really interesting lens for looking at my research. And what he basically said is that students are either routine or adaptive experts, and this can tell you a lot about how they interact with the routine. And I took his concepts, which I'm going to explain to you a little more in depth in a moment, and combined it with my understanding of my routine to create my own spectrum of expertise that goes all the way from a routine novice, so someone who's not an expert in my routine, all the way to an adaptive expert in my Koreh, וכיף. So a routine novice is someone who doesn't have procedural efficiency in my routine, someone who doesn't really know the flow of the routine, who might have to stop at the sign and think about what they have to do to participate in it efficiently every single time they walk past the door, and who maybe doesn't participate in it all the time, and who also doesn't know the purpose on the survey that I asked them to fill out. Whereas a routine expert, right over here, is someone who has or is gaining procedural efficiency. So they know how to participate in the routine efficiently. They know how to go with the flow when they go in the classroom door. And they participate the majority of the time and also maybe know the meaning of the routine. An adaptive expert also has procedural efficiency. They participate the majority of the time. They know the purpose. And then that really important thing, they know, just like that boy you saw in the video, how to use what they know about Hebrew to go inside that routine and use it to make it more meaningful to them, how to change that word loveshet to lovesh. So I went back over all my data, and I looked at all my students, and I decided to categorize them according to this spectrum to see which ones were routine novices and which ones were adaptive experts, so that I could really look at all my students and decide what I needed to do to help them kind of move to the next step on the spectrum. So I had 2 students who were routine novices. They didn't have procedural efficiency because they only participated in the routine 1 time each. So they didn't know the purpose of the routine. I had 1 student who was becoming a routine expert. He participated in the routine 60% of the time, showing that he was gaining procedural efficiency, and he also didn't know the purpose of the routine on that survey that I handed out. Now I had 2 students who were routine experts. They participated in the routine 100% of the time, showing that they have procedural efficiency, because every time I had a video of them or I had field notes of them, I wrote that they knew how to read the sentence perfectly, but on the survey, they didn't know the meaning, which is why I couldn't put them in the next category of becoming an adaptive expert, where I had 6 students who both knew the meaning and participated the majority of the time. Now, that one student that I've told you about a ton of times already, who knew the difference between lovesh and lovesh, was an adaptive expert, and he showed this to me a few other times when he also was able to tell me the sentence ani ochelet chaso, which I showed you all the way at the beginning, I eat lettuce, and change that from ochelet to ochel, from the feminine form of ochelet to the masculine form. And he also participated the majority of the time and had procedural efficiency. So, based on where each student was on the spectrum, I was able to think about what I needed to do to help them either gain procedural efficiency or become an adaptive expert to gain creativity. Because I think that both of these are really important for second language speakers, because procedural efficiency helps you kind of gain what you need to make everything second nature. So like when you're speaking a second language, like Hebrew, grammar needs to become second nature so that you can kind of just not think about what you need to say, so it just like comes out of you fluently. But when you have adaptive expertise, you have the flexibility and creativity needed to really express yourself and your thoughts in that language. So now, knowing what I do about Hatana's concept of routine and adaptive expertise, and having learned about and really studied my students and how they participate in this routine, I want to take what I know and apply it next year in my first grade classroom and help them gain procedural efficiency and adaptive expertise so that they can both become a little bit more fluent and gain flexibility and creativity in their language. So, toda rava, thank you, and I'm happy to take questions and comments.